We're here today to discuss AI in government. And Alex talked this morning about the importance of China's investment. And I think that's a great place for us to start. Given that China sees investment in AI as a quote unquote historic opportunity to leapfrog development of national security technology, what does the U.S. government need to do now to position the U.S. to remain the leading power globally? Me to start? That'd be great.
Well, first of all, thanks to Alex and the Scale team for even hosting this. It's such an important discussion. You absolutely hit the moment, right? Hit the nail on the head in terms of the perfect moment. I think AI is a critical component of the strategic competition that we're facing with China. And we see the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese state, throwing every resource they possibly can at it, from human capital dimension, churning out the necessary tech talent that they need, investing strongly in companies, leveraging civil military fusion to make sure that whatever companies come up with in China can be accessed very easily and fluidly by the PLA. They've pulled out of all the stops. And, oh, by the way, the traditional use of, tools like efforts to steal IP and so forth from others, and steal talent from others. I mean, if you look at the talents programs in the United States, they are being extremely aggressive. There's one example I recently heard where in one of our national labs, 150 employees were found to be in Chinese talents programs that were undisclosed. I mean, they are being very, very aggressive going after our talent. So we've got to have a very systematic approach. And I think the National Security Commission on AI actually laid out a very comprehensive strategy that I hope, some of which has been legislated. I hope more of it will get legislated and funded, importantly. But we've got to invest in the basic technological underpinnings. We've got to open up the spigot on tech talent, both investing and educating our own talent, but also I was so pleased to hear the senator mention legal immigration reform, because one of our core strengths as a nation is being able to attract the best and brightest talent from around the world, encouraging them to make their homes here, build their businesses here, bring their talents here. That we hurt ourselves when we choke that off, can't get out of our own way in terms of the politics of immigration. So that's a key component. But on the defense side, let me just finish with this idea. I actually don't think it's an innovation problem. We've got the Scale AIs, we've got other companies out there that are coming to the department with cutting edge tools, products, offerings. We have an innovation adoption problem, and this is something Eric Schmidt and the Defense Innovation Board have said. And it really goes to the point that was raised before. We have got to fundamentally rethink how we acquire these technologies, how we interact with the commercial sector, how we remove the barriers for the most successful prototypes to scale and actually get into production and serve at an enterprise level. And happy to talk, about some ideas about how to do that. But I think it really isn't about building, consolidation to create more innovation. It really is an adoption problem from a national security perspective more than anything else.
Another issue I wanted to talk about was regulation. So, Mac, I was hoping you could help us out about how the public and lawmakers should think about regulating AI, and how can governments regulate responsibly without stifling innovation?
Yeah. Well, it's a huge challenge. And let me back up just a second, a little bit on your first question. So what do we need to do when we think about China? The first thing is do no harm. It's kind of like the doctors. And we could I think the apocalyptic rhetoric that you hear, extinction, it's worse than nukes, et cetera, it does harm. But I think premature regulation or some federal agency, like the FTC, that wants to say, oh, I'm going to regulate all this, that does tremendous harm. Part of what we need to think about is how to have the sort of thoughtful conversation that we've had on this stage today. That's what we ought to strive toward, not this knee-jerk, I'm going to regulate, it's going to be the end of mankind sort of thing. And so that's a mindset that is a little different. And I would say, secondly, we need to build on our strengths. One of our strengths, as Senator Rounds was saying, is this dynamic market economy. We shouldn't try to imitate China. We ought to be aware that they have this command and control with all these resources and all this data that they're gathering on their people. We need to have our eyes wide open. That doesn't mean we need to imitate them. We need to build on our strength, which is this dynamic economy. It gets to what Michèle just said. It needs to be easier to do business with the federal government, especially the Department of Defense and intelligence community, for the smaller, innovative companies, or the non-traditional, I would say the non-traditional defense suppliers. Some of them are big, but they just don't do business with the Department of Defense. So as I think about regulation, I think of continue this thoughtful conversation. Michèle mentioned in 2018, as part of the Defense Authorization Bill, we created the National Security Commission on AI. And they did tremendous work. Congress adopted some of it, not all of it. Now there's a successor, which is the Special Competitive Studies Project. You're hearing more kind of thoughtful conversation from Kissinger and Eric Schmidt. Microsoft put some stuff out a week or two ago. That and the kind of conversation we've had today, let's think our way through this. That's the approach, I think, to, there may be regulation and guardrails that everybody talks about, but let's do it thoughtfully, not in a knee-jerk way.
And I guess what happens if the U.S. sets norms and guardrails, but say China doesn't? What does that mean for the future of AI?
So I think that's the key point here. If we become overly restrictive in some way, nothing good comes from that. So look, let's be honest. The U.S. can beat China on this hands down if we don't beat ourselves first. And I think that's the real challenge. And I think that's what, both Mac and Michèle alluded to. If we're going to lose this, we're going to lose it because we shoot ourselves in the foot by either over-regulating or, I agree with Senator Warner, there have to be some guide rails. But if the U.S. government comes in heavy, it's going to stifle the thing that's going to help us beat the Chinese, and that's the innovation that all you guys bring to the table, right? So we have to be careful of not, he mentioned that the Chinese are regulating. They're regulating for a very different reason. And those reasons are antithetical to democracy. I don't know if we need to follow a European model. I'm not sure that always works in the U.S. So we need our own version of it, and I think it has to be light with some guide rails, but not stifling innovation, because that's what's going to get us ahead of where China is. And that's why, people leave China and come here, as, was discussed earlier, right? So you're right. We have to be very careful not to, kill this in the crib.
Another topic I wanted to hit on was AI, trust with AI. And how do we think the intelligence community, the Pentagon, other federal agencies can support that culture change for personnel to use AI tools? I don't know, Andrew, if you wanted to.
So this is those in the audience who have certainly worked at the CIA, this is a big deal. How much do you trust the AI? If you're an analyst, let's face it, today's analysts on virtually any topic are overwhelmed with data. When I was an analyst, I covered North Korea, and I had one file drawer that contained basically everything I needed to know. Today, there's no way that an analyst can keep up with, you name the topic of interest. And so AI can play a critical role. And some of the doom and gloom about AI taking everything over, I like Mac, put that aside. I think it's hype. But AI can become a great assistant because it can help, for example, in this case, analysts sort of think the bigger thoughts, as opposed to being stuck with the tyranny of what's, all the information that's flowing through, making sure they read everything, fearing they missed something. But, as an analyst or anybody in the intelligence community, you have to judge what you're getting. If you begin to just take it whole cloth and just say, okay, it must be right because it's AI, that's when I think the trouble starts. So, the same kinds of questions as an intelligence officer you think about when a source tells you something, like what's he saying? Does it make sense? Is he trying to influence me in some way? It's the same kind of stuff with AI. Not that AI is evil, but it's just absorbing information from all over. And, is someone planting information for it to be sort of sucked up by some AI engine? And then a result that pops out isn't really the result that you're looking for. So I think as long as people maintain that, that when Bob Gates was the director of CIA, he used to say when a CIA officer sees a dozen roses, he looks for the coffin. And as long as we continue looking for the coffin, even when we're using AI, I think it'll work. If we outsource it and just say, well, popped out of some AI engine, I don't understand it, it must be right, that's where the danger is.
Can I just add, I think part of it, when you add to that, not only the intelligence analyst perspective, but now the warfighter perspective where someone's about to take kinetic action in perhaps using, AI informed or enabled intelligence or suggestions. I think the whole question, the trust is built in part first on explainability. It can't be a black box. We have to understand how the model is working, how it's learning, why it's coming to the conclusions or recommendations it is or not. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is experience. A lot of this, the learning part of it is the machine-human interaction. So as the model is developed, the human reacts and says, if you're doing facial recognition, okay, is this, we think this is the person you're looking for. Is this yes? Yes. Okay, great. The machine learns. Is that image incorrect? No, that's not the right person. Okay, now that's further learning. But there has to be experience of the users really understanding, gaining trust through experience that, that the model is actually giving them good, factually based, good data-based suggestions. And then they also need to understand the limits. Like if I've gone to Indo-PACOM and trained a model in that environment, and now I'm going to pick it up and put it in EUCOM, which is like going from a maritime air environment to a land-based, totally different situation, that's not going to work. There are limits to so we have to educate the users and give them some experience with this to know when to trust their own intuition, that this doesn't actually seem right. And I'm gonna have confidence that I don't trust this particular recommendation and have some sense of the limits of the model as well as its potential capabilities.
And could I just add, because I've been thinking about Senator Warner's point that we're kind of conflating terms here. So using these large language models for intelligence analysis, doing the kinds of things Michèle was talking about is one thing. First time I was exposed to something like AI was down at Fort Hood, and they were telling me about putting sensors on trucks. And then they collect this data, and then they can figure out when they need to change a tire or an oil filter or something ahead of time so it's not broken down. You have your truck, Now, by the way, I checked several years later, they still hadn't really implemented it. But the point is, that's pretty simple stuff. And if you can see the benefits from predictive maintenance, for going through a bunch of NIH studies and finding some insights you didn't see before on curing a disease, that can build trust in AI, which is, but it's different than the chat GPT that has occupied everybody's attention. So we can walk, crawl, walk, run, our way through these issues. You don't have to solve everything in a single bound.
Sorry, you're losing control of your panel here, but I think inspired by what Max said, there's a journey here, and kinetic, using AI to support kinetic action is like way out here, and we are here. And I think if you think about how this is going to start, it is starting. How do you sift through massive amounts of data to focus on the data that matters to the intelligence analyst, to the COCOM, to whoever, to really focus in to make a decision and sort of predictive intelligence. One example recently, it was published in the newspaper and talked about, so it's okay to mention, was, Spacecom watches how other adversarial countries try to do proximity operations. They try to send their satellites up close to see our most exquisite satellites and what are we doing and so forth. Normally, you would have a couple of days of notice on this. This time, they using a predictive model, 51 days of warning that this was going to happen because they saw the patterns in the prior instances of this and saw the same patterns being repeated. And so tremendous value to give the decision maker, okay, now instead of having 3 days, I now have 50 days. Some similar models were used to see Russian invasion is coming in September, came in February. So that's here and now. Second is now, AI that will create a more resilient, self-healing network of networks for C4ISR. Imagine using AI to switch, almost be like thinking of electrical grid, switching the flows of data and intelligence when a particular part of the network is being attacked. That is something that is, I think, a near-term prospect. The third is human-machine teaming, where you give, one pilot the ability to control 100, 200, 500 drones in a swarm, that human-machine teaming. Those are the sort of near-term things that you could see happening in the next, I don't know, I'll let Alex tell us how long that will take, 5 to 10 years. Some of it's happening now, some of it's happening soon. So before we get hung up on regulating to prevent killer robots, we've got a very strong policy in DoD that says not going to happen, humans going to stay in the loop. But we're not moving fast enough on the here and now opportunities that are mature and ready, and it's just a matter of removing the obstacles to enable that adoption.
Yeah, are there any other near-term examples that you all want to give of how we could be using AI today at the Pentagon or within the intelligence community? I know you talked about predictive maintenance.
Yeah, I personally, I think the possibilities are enormous in backroom support kinds of functions. I mean, if any place has a bunch of data that can't talk to each other, it's the Pentagon. And so going through that, trying to logistics, there's all sorts of things that are not lethal action, as Michèle was talking about, where we could be more efficient, we could get what we need to where we need it faster, and I think in the short term, those possibilities, which you've already seen private business take advantage of, those are a huge potential for DoD right away.
I think looking at patterns that human beings can't see because of the volume that they're not detecting, which is certainly within the capabilities today. Also, there's so much available on social media where you can begin to understand the sentiment in a place because it's all out there and it's available, and you just need the engine to go through it and help you understand what you're seeing. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, today for the intelligence community to use AI, and those are just going to grow over time as the sophistication and capabilities of AI grow. So I think it portends a bright future for the intelligence community because it's going to be a great tool. The danger is that it could be a great tool for others who do not have the investment in the intelligence community we have in the U.S. and could they leapfrog, right, by using AI to get better. So to me there's a risk there. We just have to be ahead of that.
Another topic I want to talk about are deep fakes and misinformation. How do you think U.S. decision makers can hedge the impact? And how can we determine what's real and what is fake?
Do you want to start us from the intel perspective, or you want me to jump in? Yeah.
It's an enormous problem.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an enormous problem for the first part of the century. The idea, determining real from fake. And that has huge consequences in the intelligence community. Because, if you can't determine real from fake, you then can lead a policymaker down the wrong path. And then then bad decisions come. So I mean, I don't have an answer, but it's an enormous task.
Yeah. I'm going to get way out over my skis as a non-technologist talking about this, but my understanding is, there's a lot of work going into understanding how deep fakes are produced, and then sort of, reverse engineering from that. Okay, what are the things that we can use, the markers that we can use to detect that something's been tampered with, that this particular approach has been used, or this particular marker is there, so that we can start to create detection models that are very sophisticated and multi-layered, because it's not only video, it's audio, it's all kinds of, it's getting into our data sets and creating false data there. So very complicated, but I think there's a lot of good work being done on trying to understand how deep fakes are created of different kinds, and then can we take that knowledge and create better detection systems. And I'd love to see, I mean, it's certainly going to have to happen in the intelligence community, but it also needs to happen, for all of us. Like I guarantee you there's going to be a deep fake of a presidential candidate in the next presidential cycle that'll seem really, really real. And people will have a hard time knowing whether this is real or fake.
And with just a little political cast on it, maybe, going back to what Andy said at the beginning, it's not what the other guys do that worries me the most, it's what we do to ourselves. We're pretty good at turning against each other and becoming paralyzed. And if an adversary uses, say, a large language model to target messages to exacerbate our differences or create them with deep fakes or whatever, they could, in essence, win without firing a shot. And this is the thing that worries me the most. It's kind of the misinformation writ large. And so I'm exactly in the same place. If you were to ask me where government should put its money, it's invest in detection. And then overcome some of the classification issues that the senators were talking about to let the public know where things are coming from. And meanwhile, we need to do better about teaching our kids media literacy and things like that, but that's a long-term thing. This is the area I think where we are most vulnerable as a society, is adversaries honing in on mis or disinformation, or even exacerbating the differences that we've already got politically.
And do you think the Pentagon and the intelligence community are investing in the right things when it comes to AI? Or is that something that needs to be rethought?
I think they are doing some of the right things, and at least there is a focus on this. I think with the creation of the new chief data an AI office, that's a good thing. They are working with small companies like Scale, like others, but I'm sure if Alex weren't were less polite, he'd probably share stories of how difficult it is. We make it really, really hard. And frankly, I mean, at West Exec, we work with a whole range of small tech companies, and there are a lot. I can't count the number of companies that just finally give up. Like, I've won every prototype, I've won every SIBR, I've got every, my, OT, first OT, other transactional authority contract, but I can't get myself into production and into the program of record, even though everybody loves them. We love your product, we all want it. Yes, and the users, the end users want it. Right now you have, a lot of interesting AI work going on at the COCOM level. They're completely now addicted to these predictive intelligence models. They have no ability to buy them. And the COCOMs don't buy things, right? I mean, I think we need to, first of all, Congress has been very generous with authorities. There are probably a few more that we need, including some bridge funding that allows you to take the successful prototype, bridge that 2-year gap by refining it from the MVP into the production-ready version, so that is really ready to go with minimal risk. when the palm that it's in finally comes to, arrives. But I think also just as important is, this is big change for the Pentagon. You need a change management approach that says acquiring software, acquiring AI is not the same as building an aircraft carrier or a fighter jet. You have to train a subcadre in how to deal with commercial companies, how to acquire software, how to move with speed, how to have a higher risk tolerance because you're going to iterate and it's going to get better over time. You're not taking years to define military requirements, locking them in stone, and then going out with an RFP. So we have to train those people. And then you got to incentivize them. You have to not chop their heads off the first time they fail. You have to create a career path for them. You've got to promote and reward them for being more risk tolerant and moving faster. So this is the piece of the puzzle that I don't see the Pentagon having, figured out yet, to really go from saying all the right things, investing in the scouting and the prototyping, but just not being able to bring things into production with speed and scale, which is, what we're going to need to win this race.
From that, do you all feel like there are enough authorities that Congress has given, or what can make this better, I guess?
Well, I think we've given them a lot, as Michèle said. I'm not sure that there's not something else that there's probably other things that can be done. To me, the big piece now from a congressional standpoint is flexibility of funding. In this area, you just can't predict 2 years ahead of time when you're coming up with a budget what technology that you're going to want to fund, and so both DOD and Congress are going to have to loosen up a little bit and increase transparency, by the way. But they've got to have more flexible funding for fast-changing technologies. One brief anecdote: about 10 days ago, I went down to Tampa, where CENTCOM had their second Shark Tank. So you had these folks from the military come and present their ideas. I think all but one of them were AI connected, and including the winner. What's going through my mind is, okay, as Michèle's point, CENTCOM has a little money and they can do some of this. But all of these guys who are looking at what they could do with AI and how it could make such a difference for the military are going to be frustrated because the military doesn't have a way to get it out of there and do it more broadly. So I do think flexibility of funding for the ideas that pop up and you say, yes, we're going to go, that's really the key thing.
I agree 100% with what we just heard. Look, the intelligence community, I think, is investing in the right places or beginning to invest in the right places on AI. If there's one single thing that the U.S. government could do to help, is to blow up the FAR and start over. I just had to fill it out because I'm doing some work for Johns Hopkins. My wife could hear me cursing, 3 rooms away. She said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I'm filling out this stupid document." And she said, "Well, you worked for the federal government for 37 years. You can't be complaining now." It really does have to change, because it is big companies who have 500 lawyers and compliance people and all that, and it's all automatic is one thing, but the engine of American innovation is in small companies, and if they're confronted with that document, which many of you have seen, figure out, I'm not sure how to answer this, what does this mean, it doesn't incentivize. And on the other side, the government does not train people how to deal with small companies. They train people on how to deal with Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Jonathan, big companies. Yeah. And they don't, most people who are COTRs, and I'll speak from our experience at the agency, don't know how to deal with small companies. They don't realize, I got to make payroll in 2 weeks. So when is this coming? We're used to dealing with big companies. And in my previous job, at the end of every year, I would have to contact these companies and say, could you please invoice us so we can get the money off our books, right? Which is something that none of you would be familiar with, but these big companies are like, oh yeah, we'll get to that $1 million, So it just has to shift a bit to incentivize contact with small companies where the innovation is happening.
It looks like we have time for one more topic to discuss, and I was hoping to hit on the talent piece and what you all think there in terms of recruiting and retaining top AI talent.
Well, I would like to see more incentives to enable anyone in the United States and who wants to kind of get a STEM degree, create some kind of program where maybe you get your tuition paid for in exchange for public service commitment of some sort. We did this. The Congress did this for cyber 10 years ago, and tremendous impact. Love to see that expanded to include things like AI and so forth. But again, I think the second thing is what we discussed already, is really a targeted immigration reform that would open up many more visas, much more of a pathway to attract the best STEM talent from friendly countries around the world, incentivize them to come study, build, stay, become U.S. citizens, build businesses here, contribute. And then the last thing is this building bridges between this incredible innovation ecosystem and the national security community in terms of exchange of personnel. Here again, the most of the department lawyers will get very worried about, well, if a Google employee comes and spends, or Scale employee comes and spends 3 years in the Pentagon working in some service office, and then they go back, won't that give them competitive advantage for the next RFP or whatever? So there are legitimate issues of conflict of interest that need to be worked out. But we need to take programs that are currently in the dozens of people and get them into the hundreds or thousands of people, and it's both ways. We need the civilians and military folks in the Pentagon to really have some immersive experiences in the tech world to understand this ecosystem and how to be better acquirers and customers. But we also need tech talent to understand, what's really needed. What's the warfighter, priorities? How can they take their experience inside government and go out and build better products and services?
I think Michèle's exactly right on all three things. Just like we need greater flexibility in funding, we need greater flexibility in bringing people in and out of government. And I think she's exactly right. As we are talking about hurting ourselves, as long as we are in this total gridlock on anything related to immigration, we are just not just shooting both feet, but knees and other things. So we don't have to solve it all in a single bound, but to have at least some targeted way for people who will contribute to our understanding of AI, or however we want to frame it. But do something, start, and then you can expand it and you can go from there, but do something.
It's the career flexibility that I think is the key, and certainly in the intelligence community, people come and stay, and we have to get used to hey, you come and you work in the intelligence community for a decade, you then go out for a decade and go off and do something else and work for Microsoft or Google or you name it, and then come back. Because in every instance that I can think of, certainly at the agency, people who did that came back better. They knew more. And certainly for in areas where there's a very rapid technological change like AI, you want that, right? You want people going out and coming back, and you want that flow through to be pretty dynamic, so that you can keep pace with what's happening outside. So I think that would make a big difference.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I wanted to thank you all for the insightful discussion.
Well, thank you.